Chapter 1, Introduction to Communication Studies. So we'll start off by looking at a definition of communication. Communication is the process of generating meaning by sending and receiving verbal and nonverbal symbols and signs that are influenced by multiple contexts. So a little bit of history. The beginning of communication or public speaking was known as rhetoric, and rhetoric was known as an art form, and it focused on public communication, primarily oratory used in discussions or debates regarding laws and policy. Ancient Greece rhetoricians really encouraged the use of rhetoric or public speaking as the society evolved into democratic government. So they felt that it was very important that all individuals were able to communicate their viewpoints effectively. Now, as we know, when the government began and they began teaching oratory, those classes, it was part of the curriculum. It was considered just like reading, writing, or math now. It was part of the curriculum, but only a select population was educated. So at that point, then wealthy white males were the ones that were educated and taught how to be effective orators, because that's the viewpoint and that was the leadership in government. As the government evolved and it became more of a democratic society, then it became more important that everyone have a viewpoint in order to help shape laws and policy. It also became important because of the judicial system that began. They began jury trials in their judicial system, but their jury trials were unlike ours. There were around 500 to 2,000 people that served as a jury member at that time. So think about an attorney, a lawyer at that time who was representing someone at a trial, and that's a huge audience. I mean, that's a really big public speaking engagement. So it's very important that communication was done effectively. Aristotle really saw the value of communication when it came to persuasion. And Aristotle said in order to persuade someone, you have to do three things, and he called them proofs. You have to show them that you're credible. That's ethos. You have to provide valuable research, information, statistics. That's logos. And you also have to have some sort of an emotional appeal. That's pathos. Cicero then came and expanded that to the 5 canons of rhetoric. He said you have invention, you have arrangement, so you have to choose something original to talk about. You have to organize it. You have to have a very clear style. You have to deliver effectively, and you have to commit it to memory so that you're focused on the audience. So communication really evolved through time. It started off as an art form and kind of became pivotal in the beginnings of democratic societies. As years went on, it became more practical, where communicating was just a way to effectively talk about scientific research and findings that may be coming. And then it went more to a stylized focus. And I think now it's a balance. One thing that I find interesting from our Greek philosophers are that they felt like through discourse, through communication, that's where you find truth. That I don't have truth and you don't have truth, but through our discussions, somewhere in the middle, we can find the truth. So think about in today's society, the importance of being an effective public speaker and an effective communicator, that in order to have a role in government and a role in politics and society and really being the center of change, being able to effectively communicate your beliefs is key to that. So that's kind of the goal through the years of encouraging students as they go through college and are educated to really become competent communicators started with a goal of having effective communicators in our democratic society. But we can see how it flows to every other aspect of our personal and professional lives. So we're going to talk about a few forms of communication. The most basic form is intrapersonal communication. That is the communication we have within ourselves. You might think, I I don't talk to myself, but we know that we all do. We know that it can take any kind of stimulus, whether within us or outside of us, that begins a trail of thoughts that can go on for a really long time if we're not refocused. It can start with, I'm really hungry, I don't know what I want to eat, and then that goes off into a tangent to there's something going on around me and I'm trying to process what I'm seeing, and that can kind of take us another direction. So talking to ourselves really helps us adapt to the social society around us, and it also has a big impact on our perception of the world around us, and that could be either positive or negative, but depending on the self-talk going on in our mind. The next type of communication is interpersonal. That's the communication between two people, a small group of people whose lives mutually influence one another. These are our close friendships, our romantic relationships, our family. It builds, effective interpersonal communication can build, maintain, or possibly end a relationship. It's more planned than intrapersonal communication. It's definitely more interactive. It's more goal-oriented. Sometimes the goal is to be cordial to someone. You walk into work, you say hello to the same person every day. Sometimes the goal is communicating with someone that you want a deeper type of relationship with. So then we have group communication. This is the communication among 3 or more people interacting to achieve a shared goal. It's more intentional and formal than interpersonal communication. Oftentimes groups are assigned and not voluntary. So that can lead to a little bit different dynamic. That can also lead to some more complicated interactions when you may have differing viewpoints and differing ways to approach tackling a goal. Public communication is sender focused. Typically, though, you are able to at least receive nonverbal feedback if you're giving a public speech. This is the level of communication that most people fear or at least don't enjoy. It's typically, you have to be more intentional because you're talking to a larger audience. Mass communication is even bigger. It's not reciprocal. It's one way. You are not allowed to give instant feedback, either verbal or nonverbal with mass communication. It's usually through print or electronic media, and it is very intentional because it is reaching a large number of people. So the communication process, I want you to think about that word process. Process involves multiple steps. So we will talk about the fact that there are a lot of ways within the communication process where communication can fail. I think sometimes as communicators, we send our message and we just I'm good. I did my part. I sent my message. I'm sure I did a perfect job wording the message, and they're going to understand it and they're going to receive it, and everything's going to be great. But we know that that's not necessarily the case. And there's a lot of components to the communication process. And if one of those components falls apart, then the communication is a failure. So the first component is participants, and that's pretty obvious. We have the person that sends and the person or people that receive the message. The message is either verbal or nonverbal, and it's the information being conveyed from sender to receiver. Now, encoding is something we do all the time but may not always be aware of it. Every time we send a message, we process, how are we going to send this message? What is the best way to word or phrase the information that I'm needing to send? So when we encode a message, we need to think about the person we're sending to. How old are they? What level of education do they have? How much experience do they have in this topic? And we need to make sure that we choose the correct wording when we send that message. Every time we receive a message, we decode it. So every time we take in a message, we apply our meaning to that message. We process what we've been told, and we apply what we understand that message to be. So think about right here with 3 and 4. These are key places where communication can fail. If I choose the wrong words in the way that I send you a message, that message is not going to be received the way I intended. Maybe I chose some really great words, but when you decoded it, you took it another direction. You went another way. And so you misunderstood what I said. So encoding and decoding alone can cause a lot of miscommunication. Channel is the space in which we send the message. So that can be face-to-face, email, text, or over the phone. So the channel is the space in which we send a message, and we have to think about what information are we sending. I'm probably a lot older than most of you, or all of you probably, and so sometimes when I'm sending a text and I realize it's getting really long, I just delete it and then pick up the phone and call someone, because I think, okay, while I would rather text, that's not the best channel for this message. And sometimes when I'm typing, I'll say something sarcastic, and I think they're going to read it in the voice that I want them to read it, but alas, they do not, and then there's a miscommunication there. So just kind of consider the message you're wanting to send and think about what is the right channel based on the information and the person you're sending it to. So there's a way that we can fail in communication is because we choose the wrong channel. Then there's noise. And in my opinion, noise is the biggest distractor and the biggest obstacle to communication. It is for me, at least. Noise is anything that interferes with a message being sent between participants. So we have environmental noise. So you're in a classroom. In my classroom, when I teach face-to-face in Corsicana, in Avero, the band is across the hall from us. And so a lot of times they'll be practicing, and they're very good. They're great musicians. But if I'm trying to teach on public speaking and all we hear are drums and trumpets, that's environmental noise that interrupts our ability to communication. I think sometimes that's not even something that's audible. Think about if you're like me, you're easily distracted. And so if there's a flickering light or even a light buzz above you, that's something that keeps your focus instead of in the moment. Semantic noise is miscommunication. That's that noise that occurs when encoding and decoding doesn't happen successfully. And so we miscommunicate and we have misunderstandings. And then there's internal noise. To me, this is our biggest challenge. This is my biggest challenge. That's anything within you that prevents you from listening and understanding the message. So think of this. Have you ever sat in class or in church and you're starving? It's almost time to eat, and your focus is, I forgot to bring my lunch today. So where am I going to eat? Okay, I could go here or here. And then about 15, 20 minutes later, you realize you haven't heard anything that's being said because you've really been planning mealtime. Other things that happen are things like, I don't feel well, I have a really bad headache, so I can't focus. I had a fight with someone before I got to class, and that's my distractor. I have a test after this class, and I'm worried about that, and that's my focus right now. So I think those are some of our biggest obstacles to communication, because with internal noise, sometimes we're not aware we're doing it. Sometimes we have been in our own mind, we've been thinking about all kinds of things, but what's right in front of us, and it takes us sometimes 10, 20, 30 minutes to realize we have not been in the moment and we have not been a part of the communication process. There's a few models of communication here in your notes, and they're in your textbook. We're not going to focus on those today. The biggest thing I think is that we know that it's an interactive process, and the terms on the previous page are the important things to me. I do want to touch on an interaction model. Feedback. That feedback is an observable verbal and nonverbal communication that's sent in response to a message. And there's 3 functions of feedback. We have assurance, which is confirming a message is received. So that's simply like nodding to someone. Adjustment, rephrasing the message to confirm understanding. So maybe you're not sure that you decoded the message correctly. So then you would say, are you saying this is what I need to do? And then kind of rephrasing it. And then we have insight, which is when we elaborate on messages that's received. We kind of take it a little deeper. We give our thoughts on it. So this is an example of the interaction model of communication, and then your book and notes talk about the transaction model. So let's move on to the communication principles. A few things to think about. Communication is integrated into all parts of our lives: academic, professional, personal, and civic. All parts of our lives, communication is key to our ability to maintain and be successful in these areas. Communication meets needs. It meets our physical needs. So think about if you're going to the doctor. If you have children, think about when your child's not feeling well and you're trying to figure out what on earth is wrong. They don't necessarily have the communication ability to communicate their physical needs yet. But think about how valuable that is when you're able to communicate physically what you need. Instrumental needs. So sometimes we need something from someone. We need someone to do something a certain way. We need to motivate someone to do something to help us. And that is a part of communication. Relationship needs and identity needs. Communication is a process. It's a process that involves an exchange of verbal and nonverbal messages within a continuous and dynamic sequence of events. Communication messages vary in terms of the amount of conscious thought that goes into it. So sometimes our communication is more intentional than others. Communication is irreversible. I know a lot of us like to say that, oh, I was just kidding, or I didn't mean it. But the fact of the matter is, once the message is out there, the message has impact. So we need to choose our words very carefully. Communication is unavoidable. In our effort to ignore someone, we are communicating a message. Communication is guided by culture and context. Within our culture, communication is learned. Communication revolves around symbols, and those symbols are taught and learned and negotiated within the context of our culture. And within that, we follow certain rules and norms that follow the culture and context we've been raised in. It has ethical implications. Everything you say has ethical implications. Of course, we know that the gravity of this is even greater with the larger the audience that you're talking to. So sometimes if I'm talking with a friend and we get on a topic that we're not sure about, and I might say, yeah, I'm pretty sure this is the case. And then they're like, are you really sure? I'm like, well, no, I'm not sure at all. I think we need to Google it. But if you have a large audience, we should always be confident in what we're saying. We need to be confident that we're being ethical communicators. Communication competence refers to the knowledge of effective and appropriate communication patterns and the ability to use and adapt that knowledge in various contexts. So to be a competent communicator, we need to be knowledgeable, we need to be able to use and apply that knowledge, and we need to be able to adjust that knowledge and adjust our communication abilities in varying contexts. So socially, we should be able to be an effective communicator. Professionally, we should be able to be an effective communicator. And we have to know that there's not necessarily one standard for that, so we need to be a little bit flexible. So the National Communication Association identifies these aspects of competence. Someone that states ideas clearly, communicates ethically, recognizes when it's appropriate to communicate, identifies communication goals, selects the most appropriate and effective medium for communication, demonstrates credibility, identifies and manages misunderstandings, manage conflict, be open-minded about another's point of view, and listens attentively. So developing competence. Competence involves verbal and nonverbal elements. Communication competence is needed in order to understand ethics and to develop cultural awareness, to use computer-mediated communication to think critically. So competence involves knowledge, motivation, and skills. There's multiple states of competence, which we're not going to focus on today, but this is in your book and in your notes. I do want to talk about being a mindful communicator. A mindful communicator actively and fluidly processes information. Becoming more mindful has benefits, including achieving communication goals, detecting deception, avoiding stereotypes, and reducing conflict. So you think about mindful is being aware of every part of the communication interaction. So communication apprehension is a fear or anxiety experienced by a person due to actual or imagined communication with another person or persons. 15 to 20% of college students express general anxiety about communication, and public speaking anxiety is a type that most people struggle with that. It's a type of communication anxiety that produces physiological, cognitive, and behavioral reactions in people when faced with a real or imagined presentation. Top 10 ways to reduce speaking anxiety. Remember that you're not alone. Public speaking anxiety is common, so don't ignore it. Confront it. You can't literally die of embarrassment. Audiences are forgiving and understanding. It always feels worse than it looks. Take deep breaths. It releases endorphins, which naturally fight the adrenaline that causes anxiety. Look the part, dress professionally to help your confidence. Channel your nervousness into positive energy and motivation. Start the process early. Start your outline early. Start your research early. Better information means you're more confident. Practice and get feedback from a trusted source. Don't just practice for your pet. Visualize success through positive thinking. Prepare, prepare, prepare. Practice is the speaker's best friend.